Welcome to this episode of the Zoology podcast. I am your host, Samuel Richardson, and on today's episode we will be discussing something which many people may consider an act of evil, this being infanticide. We will be discussing why some animals commit infanticide and why this disturbing behaviour may have evolved. But first, what is infanticide? Well, in zoological terms, infanticide refers to the killing of an infant or juvenile by a mature member of the same species. Now, some of you may be asking, what about animals which lay eggs? Is destruction of those eggs also infanticide? Well, the basic answer is yes, but technically it's called ovicide. So, the most famous example of infanticide, or at least the one which I was taught about during my degrees, is that committed by lions. When a male lion takes over a pride, he may seek out the infant offspring of the previous patriarch and kill them. He may pursue this behaviour even if the infant's mother tries to defend her offspring. This can go even further into something called Prospective Infanticide, in which the male lion kills infants born after his conquest of the pride. This tends to happen when the female gives birth before the male has had any mating opportunities. The question is, why would a conquering lion kill the young offspring of his now driven off or killed rival? What benefit does this new lion gain from this behaviour, and how do the female lions deal with such behaviour? Well, in short, it's good for his own genes. Lionesses, when suckling young, do not go into estrus, and therefore any male who takes over a pride and doesn't commit infanticide will not be able to breed until his rival's cubs are weaned, and the female becomes receptive to sexual activity again, which can take up to over a year and a half. If you couple this with the conquering male needing to fend off other intruding males during this time, results in the average tenure of a pride being only 2 years. Therefore, the selection pressure for a male to commit infanticide is particularly strong, because if the male doesn't commit infanticide, he may not get a chance to pass on his genes at all. Also, another important aspect to acknowledge is that if the male doesn't commit infanticide, any resources gained through hunting will be distributed towards another male's offspring instead of his own. This will not only increase the chances of his rival's offspring developing well and passing on their genes, it will also provide increased intraspecific competition between the conquering male's own future offspring and the cubs he has not killed. Therefore, a simple way of reducing future intraspecific competition between his own offspring and that of others is to kill all cubs which are not related to himself. This has the additional benefit of causing the lioness who was previously suckling a young cub to come back into estrus, allowing the male to breed and produce his own offspring, thus increasing his own contribution to the gene pool while reducing that of his competitors. Also, any acquired resources will now be put towards raising his own offspring, thereby further increasing the likelihood that his offspring will develop into as strong lions themselves, and thus increasing their chance of producing their own offspring in the future. This further increases the chance that the infanticidal male will increase his gene pool contribution. So, to put it simply, any conquering male lion will be under immense genetic and environmental pressure to commit infanticide, and those who don't will be quickly selected against through the process of natural selection due to those lions who do commit infanticide contributing more genetic material to the gene pool. As horrible as it sounds, at least for the male lion, committing infanticide against a rival's progeny has many benefits for himself. But what about for the mother? Does she get any benefits for the male committing this behaviour? Or is it all negative? Would she even try to stop him from killing her offspring? What counter strategies have lionesses evolved? Okay, let's start with the benefits. If a lioness allows a conquering male to kill her offspring and then breed with her, she may benefit by producing new offspring which could be more genetically diverse, and therefore have an increased chance of not suffering from genetic ailments. This can facilitate more breeding opportunities in her offspring's future, resulting in her own genes increasing within the gene pool. Although this benefit does rely on the chance that the male is more genetically diverse than her previous breeding partner, the opposite could also be true, and her new offspring could be less genetically diverse. Plus, she would also have to go through the dangerous and resource-heavy process of pregnancy. So while there could be an advantage to letting a male commit infanticide to her offspring, this benefit is highly conditional, and the female will still suffer from the downside of having to develop, carry, birth, and suckle new offspring, all of which is resource-intensive. So there seems to be a benefit for a lioness allowing a male to kill her own offspring. However, there is also many detriments to the female's health. So therefore, it would make evolutionary sense for a lioness to develop defense strategies which can help protect her cubs from male aggression. Even more so when you consider the sexual dimorphism present within lions means that male lions tend to be far larger, heavier, and stronger than a female lion. This results in aggressive male lions being a potential danger not only to the cubs, but to the mother herself. So what strategies do lionesses use to protect their offspring from an infanticidal male? Well, to do this, lionesses utilise two key methods. The first method is mostly used to defend the cubs against immigrating male lions, and this is the act of hiding the cubs. And when you couple this method with that of the boundary protection provided by the pride's resident male, this method can be effective in keeping young offspring safe. However, if the resident male has been killed by an immigrant male, well, lionesses are then forced to protect their cubs themselves, although due to the size difference it is obviously dangerous to the female's health. To increase the odds of successfully defending offspring, females will huddle all the cubs into one area and then protect them as a group of lionesses. This tactic denies the male the chance to opportunistically kill any cubs which have been left alone and unsupervised. It also increases the lioness's ability to defend against any attacks from the male, while also increasing their ability to deal damage to the male during any physical conflict. If this tactic is successful, then perhaps the cubs can grow to such a point, usually above the 9-month-old mark, where the male will lose interest in committing infanticide. And that's it really. The females are kind of limited in how they can defend themselves against a male, and that's not to say the females can't be very dangerous to a male, but their method to defend their cubs are still rather limited. What about any strategies that the lioness can use to protect offspring which have not yet been conceived? Well, when a male takes over a pride, the females may restrict his mating opportunities by acting aggressively. This will be continued long enough for either two outcomes to happen. One is that the female becomes pregnant, or two, the male lion is driven off by a coalition of travelling males. The female will then be more receptive to breeding with this male coalition. It is thought that this willingness to mate with a male coalition is due to the greater protection these males can provide to the female's future offspring. I think it is important to understand that most male coalitions are formed by related males, and therefore any infanticide against cubs sired by a male of this coalition is detrimental to the infanticidal male's genetic lineage, due to the danger present by its brothers and the cub's mother to itself, and because the cub is kin, and therefore if it is killed, the male is limiting their shared genes from propagating in the future. An interesting method used by the lions of Gir National Park in India was described by two wildlife researchers from the Wildlife Institute of India called Chakrabarti and Jhala, who published in 2019 an article on how Asiatic lionesses used a multi-male mating strategy which reduced prospective infanticide chance by males. Asiatic lions differ slightly from their African counterparts, but a key difference is in how their prides are structured. Males tend to be either solitary or existing in small coalitions, while females exist in strongly bonded prides, numbering up to 12 lionesses, the sexes only tending to associate for mating purposes. Now this point is really important, because as Chakrabarti and Jhala explain, it allows the Asiatic lionesses to manipulate male coalitions into not committing infanticide. The lionesses will mate with multiple rival coalitions before conceiving. This causes the male coalitions to be more tolerant towards the litters of the lions to which they have previously copulated with. This suggests that the litters are being left alone due to paternity uncertainty, meaning that if a male engaged in infanticide, he could potentially be killing his own offspring, and this therefore reduces the amount of infanticide. Now how cool is that? I personally think it's kind of ingenious that these lionesses are using the male's drive to want to copulate with as many females as possible to spread their genes as a protection against infanticide for their offspring. I think that's just amazing. That's an incredible, probably unintentional manipulation of the male's drive to reproduce. And it's only possible due to the social structure in which the Gir forest lionesses find themselves within. Now obviously this wouldn't be possible with the African lions, which is crazy. That these two different social situations open up the possibility for different methods to restrict infanticide. Okay, so over with my rambling. But now that we've covered infanticide in lions, you might be asking yourself about birds and if there's any difference in how our feathered friends commit or protect against ovicide. Well, some birds will also commit the same kind of infanticidal behaviour that is shown by mammals. Male house wrens are known to both destroy a female's eggs and offspring if they are present before the female has conducted one ovulation cycle. In other words, the male will commit infanticide if there is a high degree that he is not the father of her present offspring. An interesting form of infanticide is that committed by white-winged choughs. These birds live in communities numbering up to 15 individuals in which all members help to raise the young. Now when two communities of white-winged choughs meet, things can turn violent. One method that these birds use is to harass members of another chough community while they are near their nests. It has even been observed that these birds will approach a rival's community's nest while they are away and drop any eggs that they find onto the floor, thereby destroying them. It is thought that these birds do this to reduce future resource competition, which may then have the knock-on effect of allowing their own offspring a greater chance at prospering and reproducing in the future. Now, perhaps one of the most interesting types of ovicide is that committed by numerous bird species when they find something interesting in their nest, an egg, which looks like their own, but with something just off. This egg was laid by the infamous brood parasite, the common cuckoo. Now, if you don't know, the common cuckoo is a bird which tries to trick other birds into raising their offspring. This behaviour is called brood parasitism. The cuckoo tends to favour a specific bird species in which it lays eggs which are strikingly similar to that of its chosen victim. Once the cuckoo's egg hatches, the young cuckoo is known to evict the eggs or offspring out of the nest by pushing them out using its back and legs. It's clear then that any bird which has its nest parasitised by a cuckoo will take a dramatic hit in their own reproductive fitness, while benefiting that of the cuckoo. Therefore, bird species which suffer from this brood parasitism are under heavy evolutionary pressure to be able to recognise eggs which are similar to their own but not their own, and then commit ovicide against them. While this act of ovicide is not strictly infanticide because it is committed by one species against another species, namely whatever species has been parasitised by the cuckoo, I think it serves as a rather great example of how evolutionary pressures can enforce the behaviour of committing infanticide for one's own benefit. So I personally find this all super interesting. That even such a behaviour can evolve in the first place is actually just amazing to me. However, it's also interesting that if such a behaviour was committed by a human, it would be seen as horrendous. But humans are also animals, and are also under evolutionary pressure. So this begs the question, have humans evolved any infanticidal behaviours or not? Now, I think it's smart to begin with that this subject is highly controversial. Many people, especially those who are ignorant in their understanding of the processes of evolution and how natural selection works, will not want to cede the ground in their understanding of why humans can commit infanticide. And this is completely understandable. It's a hard topic, and no one wants to feel like they, their family, or other humans have evolved to commit such a repulsive act. But I would reply to the strawman I have created by saying that understanding why something happens isn't condoning the behaviour. It's also in understanding the foundations of a behaviour that we can set up an environment to minimise the behaviour's occurrence within a society or a household. So in short, evolution may facilitate a behaviour's use, but it's up to humanity to provide or restrict the environment which encourages such a behaviour. But on that thought, let us take a quick trip into the thinking of how and why humans commit infanticide. It is thought that within primates, like humans, monogamy, that is the sole sexual pairing of a male and female, has evolved due to the danger posed by other mates to the female and her offspring. Now this may be true, but what happens when the human father is gone and the mother finds herself another male partner? Well, unfortunately for the mother's children, they are 20 times more likely to become a victim of child abuse than a child whose mother and father are still together. Now why would this be? Well, from an evolutionary point of view, it's not likely to be beneficial to the new male's reproductive fitness to spend resources on a child which is not his own. I expect this is where the saying, like a red-headed stepchild, derives its meaning from, as something unwanted or unloved. I think it's interesting that whoever came up with this saying used the descriptor red-haired. Now, red hair being extremely rare would indicate to a new male that is in a relationship with the child's mother that they are unlikely to be related to the child because they are also unlikely to have red hair. And while this phenotype is being rather vibrant, is also a persistent reminder of this fact, and therefore a reminder that all resources spent on this red-headed child will be resources lost from his own offspring. Moving into the Paleolithic and Neolithic times, infanticide was thought to be related up to 50% of all infant deaths. One hypothesis is that infanticide was practiced to limit the population of an area, so that the resources of said area would not become depleted in the future, because resource depletion could easily result in the death of an entire tribe. Luckily nowadays this practice is extremely limited. However, infanticide, while illegal in most countries, is still practiced by many. Perhaps the most well-known example of a country instituting a rule which encouraged infanticide was that instituted in China, namely the one-child policy. Due to their cultural practices, male children are responsible for parental care when their parents get old, while female children actually incur a dowry burden upon the parents to their marriage to another family. Therefore, if a couple could only have one child, there is massive pressure to have a male child, as this would secure the parents' future, or having a female would place upon them a financial burden while stripping them of their future security. The pressure therefore upon the mother and father to dispose of a female baby and try again was immense. Unfortunately though, this is thought to have led to the murder of around 40.9 million Chinese baby girls. An interesting fact in human infanticide is that unlike in a species such as langurs and lions, where it is the males who are the most common cause of infanticide, in humans it's actually the female of the species. Mothers commit infanticide to their own offspring more than any other type of relation. The factors which influence the occurrence of infanticide are mental instability in the mother, deformities or illness within the newborn, the mother living in poverty, having other children to provide for, and a lack of male support. Now, while this may seem crass, but from an evolutionary point of view, poverty, an overabundance of siblings taking resources, and offspring which have developmental issues are all less likely to develop into a healthy, fully functioning adult which will be healthy enough for themselves to reproduce with a good likelihood. Therefore, raising offspring with such difficulties or in such an environment will decrease the mother's inclusive fitness due to the lack of available resources, greater parental investment needed to raise the offspring, and the cost of pregnancy incurring an even greater resource drain. In such an environment, when under such great evolutionary pressure, if coupled with great mental burden, it is clear why even humans may commit infanticide. And there we have it, an interesting yet sad podcast this month, but I'm a firm believer that we need to know why even the most immoral acts take place, and it is within this knowing where we can find solutions. But on a brighter note, I hope you found all this information as interesting as I did, and for anyone who has a little red-headed stepchild, why don't you flip evolution the finger and go make that little kid happy?